In the humid, emerald expanse of British Guiana, where sugarcane fields stretched endlessly under the unforgiving sun, a storm was brewing. Beneath the cracking whips of colonial overseers, in the suffocating cabins of slavery, thousands of enslaved souls whispered of freedom. For around 70,000 enslaved men and women toiling endlessly in this South American colony, hope was not an option, it was a necessity. And in August of 1823, hope found a voice. His name was Jack Gladstone. Jack Gladstone was no ordinary man. Enslaved yet unbent in spirit, his mind was sharp, his convictions unyielding. Born on the Success Plantation on the east coast of Demerara, he had seen firsthand the cruelties of a system that viewed human beings as mere tools for profit. Yet he had also inherited something more, the stirring wisdom of his father, Kwamina, a deeply religious man with an unshakable belief in justice. Together, they would ignite one of the largest slave uprisings in Caribbean history, the Demerara Rebellion. But to understand why this rebellion erupted, you need to delve into the world they lived in. The British colony of Demerara was built on sugar, a commodity so valuable it was called white gold. It was the engine of empire, fueling wealth for Britain, while dooming millions of Africans to lives of brutality. Enslaved laborers were seen as disposable. Resistance was met with unimaginable violence. And yet, in the 1820s, whispers began filtering across the Atlantic. Whispers of abolitionist movements gaining ground in Britain, of political clamor over the morality of slavery. For enslaved people, these whispers were kindling to a long, smoldering fire. Jack Gladstone listened to those whispers, and he read between the lines. Reports filtered in that abolitionists in Britain were urging reforms, even speculating that freedom might soon be granted. But no official word came, and the enslaved population remained chained in their misery. When British Governor John Murray declared that all this talk of reform was nothing but rumor, many saw the truth. If freedom would not be given, it must be taken. In the weeks leading up to August 1823, Jack worked tirelessly to rally his fellow enslaved people. His father, Kwamina, lent his support, torn between his Christian pacifism and the raw need for justice. Together, they orchestrated secret gatherings along the plantations, laying the groundwork for a coordinated strike. Their plan was bold. The enslaved people would rise up, but with as little bloodshed as possible. They would seize weapons, take control of their masters, and demand the local authorities end slavery outright. Jack envisioned something almost unthinkable, a rebellion with a moral edge. On the night of August 18th, it began. Under the cover of darkness, enslaved workers across several plantations armed themselves with farming tools, claiming control of estates along Demerara's east coast. It was a coordinated uprising of immense scale, involving nearly 10,000 enslaved men and women. The Success Plantation, where Jack and Kwamina had toiled for years, became one of the rebellion's strongholds. But the rebellion's idealism, its attempt to minimize bloodshed, was quickly overwhelmed by the brutal machinery of empire. Governor Murray wasted no time in calling for military force. British troops and local militia soon descended upon the plantations, armed with rifles and cannons. Within mere days, the uprising was crushed under a hailstorm of violence. And afterward, the punishment was nothing short of draconian. Over 100 rebels were executed, most of them publicly, to send a horrifying message. Many others were flogged, imprisoned, or exiled. Jack Gladstone, the rebellion's charismatic leader, was sentenced to death, though his punishment was later commuted to deportation. His father, the dignified and devout Kwamina, was not so lucky. He was hunted down by colonial forces and killed in cold blood, his body displayed on a tree as a grim warning to others. Yet for all its brutality, the rebellion was not in vain. For far away in Britain, the events in Demerara sent shockwaves through society. Reports of the uprising, and more importantly, the savage response by colonial authorities, reached abolitionist circles. The British public, already grappling with the morality of slavery, was outraged by the sheer scale of the violence. Men like William Wilberforce and Thomas Fowell Buxton seized on the Demerara Rebellion as proof that slavery was not only cruel, but impossible to sustain in a just society. In parliaments and newspapers, debates raged. Was it not the enslavers, with their ceaseless greed and inhumanity, who had provoked this uprising? Was it not the system itself, built on the bones of the oppressed, that had made rebellion inevitable? The execution of over 100 enslaved men by British hands was not just a punishment, it was a spotlight on the moral rot at the heart of the empire. 10 years later, in 1833, the British Empire abolished slavery in its colonies. The Demerara Rebellion didn't single-handedly bring about abolition, but it laid bare the inhumanity of the system. It turned the tide of public opinion, showing that the enslaved were not the passive, voiceless figures they were often painted as. They were men and women who yearned for freedom and justice, even in the face of impossible odds. Today in Guyana, Jack Gladstone is remembered not just as a historical figure, but as a symbol of resistance. He was a man who refused to accept the chains laid upon him, who dreamed of freedom for his people even when the cost was unimaginably high. His bravery and the sacrifice of those who stood beside him remind us that history is not just the story of the victors. It is the story of those who dared to dream of something better. The fields of Demerara are silent now, the sugarcane rustling softly in the wind. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echoes of the past, the chant of voices rising, the steady drumbeat of rebellion. It is the sound of a people who refused to be silenced. It is the legacy of Jack Gladstone and the men and women who fought, not just for themselves, but for the idea that freedom is worth any cost. And that idea lives on, as powerful and enduring as the tides that lap against Guyana's shores.